I'm going to ask you a question, and then I'm going to do the thing this show is not supposed to do. I'm going to stop talking. Here it is. What do you believe that you have never actually checked? I really wanted to cut that pause in the edit. Twice. That is how strong the pull is. In a show about staying with a question, I still reached to make the quiet stop. I had a reason ready. The reason was that nobody wants dead air. It's expensive, especially at the beginning. But that was not the real reason. The real reason was that the silence was uncomfortable and I wanted it to end. So did you, probably. And I would guess the reach was not toward an answer. I would guess it was toward your phone to go check something. We were built to reach. That part is old and good, and I would not want it any other way. What we were never built for is catching the answer every single time in 3 seconds for the rest of our lives. And what that costs us is the one thing we have no way to feel, because it's always the road we did not take. Let me describe a moment you know well. You are mid-sentence or mid-thought, and a small hole opens, a name you cannot place, a date you almost have, the word for the thing you are pointing at. Now, watch your hand. Is it already moving? The phone is already out of your pocket. The hole closed before you registered that it fully opened. 3 seconds start to finish, and the whole event leaves no trace. It does not feel like anything happened, because from the inside, nothing did. We do this 100 times a day now, or probably more. And I want to be careful here, because there is a version of this conversation that blames you for the reaching, and that version is wrong. The reach is old. It's older than any of us, older than the language we are using right now. Wanting the missing piece is good equipment. It is most of why we are here and not extinct, because somebody wanted to know what was on the other side of the ridge. But notice what came bundled with that wanting. For every human being who ever lived until about 30 years ago, you had to go walk over the ridge. It took 2 days. Things happened to you on the way. You saw the valley you were not looking for, and you met the people you were not looking for. And half of what you learned had nothing to do with the question that started you walking. The drive and the delay arrived together. Nobody had to design the delay in, because there was no way to take it out. What is new is not the reaching. What is new is the hit rate. We catch every time in 3 seconds. That has never been true for anyone anywhere before us. In July, a neuroscientist named Anne-Laure Le Cunff published an essay in the New York Times about this exact reflex. She is at King's College London, where she studies curiosity, and before that, she worked at Google. The number she opens with is the one that caught my attention when reading the piece. More than 60% of Google searches in the United States now end without anyone clicking a link. Sit with that for a second. 6 out of 10 times we go looking for something, we never arrive anywhere. We type the question, we read the summary, we leave. The trip is gone. There is no page, no source, no author, no detour, no accidental discovery of something better on the way. There is a question, and then there is an answer. And the distance between them has been engineered down to almost nothing. And she does not let the rest of us off the hook, which I appreciated. She names Google, but she also names ChatGPT. She names Perplexity. She names Claude, which is my preferred tool I use most days in support of this show, life, and the research behind this very episode. So let me say the honest thing early because I'm not standing above any of this. I use these tools. I like them. They are good at what they do, and what they do is genuinely useful. And I'm not here to tell you to throw your phone in the drawer and read more books by candlelight. I closed a dozen gaps today before lunch and did not agonize over a single one. That is what makes this hard to see. Nothing is being taken from us by force. There's no villain here, and there's no moment of loss you could point to. Each individual instance is fine. The name really was on the tip of your tongue, and now you have it, and the conversation moves on, and nothing bad happened. The question is not whether any one of those closures costs you something. The question is what happens to a person over years who never leaves one open. Here's the part of Le Cunff's argument that has held my attention. Curiosity is not just wanting to know a fact. That is the folk version, the one where curiosity is basically a shopping list of things that you could not have looked up yet. The research says something stranger and better than that. Curiosity is a state, and it needs one condition to switch on. It needs a gap. It needs there to be a distance between what you want to know and what you have got. When researchers put people in that state, curious about something, waiting for the answer, and then measured what happened, they found something that has almost nothing to do with the original question. Those people remembered unrelated information they ran into during the wait. Not the answer they were waiting for, the other stuff. The incidental stuff, the material that had nothing to do with anything, that just happened to be nearby while the question was open. They scanned brains and found reward circuits lighting up during the waiting. The hippocampus getting ready to lay down memory, not after the answer arrived, but rather during the not knowing. Le Cunff has an image for this that stuck with me. Curiosity opens a window, and while that window is open, learning gets deeper across the board, not just about the thing you asked, about everything within reach. But the window is only open while the question is unanswered. That is the whole mechanism. The answer closes it, which means the value was never sitting fully in the answer. It was sitting in the interval. And the interval is precisely the part where we have spent 30 years of engineering effort trying to eliminate. She has a line about where this ends up. The danger is not that people stop asking questions. It's that questions stop being doorways and start being destinations. We get very good at extracting a finished conclusion and slowly worse at building a connection nobody handed us. Now, here's where I want to add something because I think there's a way to hear all of this and that is subtly wrong. And it's the way most of us are trained to hear it. The wrong way sounds like delayed gratification. Suffer now, collect later. Eat your vegetables. Sit in the discomfort because someday there is a payoff waiting. That framing is close and it is off, and the difference matters. Think about how a muscle actually works. You load it and it strains, and the strain is not a tax you pay in order to receive the muscle later. The strain is the signal. It's the mechanism itself. The tearing and the growing are one event, seen at two different speeds. And you cannot feel the part that matters. Nobody has ever felt protein synthesis. You feel tired, and then you feel nothing at all. And then a week later, you're stronger, and you never once perceived the process that changed you. The open question runs the same way. The unresolved state is not the price of admission for the insight. The unresolved state is where the work is happening. The discomfort you feel when a question stays open is not evidence that nothing is happening. It's the closest thing you get to evidence that something is. So the practice is not endure this now for a reward later. The practice is this. The urge to close the gap is not proof that staying open is pointless. That urge is just what the mechanism feels like from the inside, and the inside is a terrible vantage point. And I want to say clearly what we are and are not blind to here, because I got this wrong for a while myself. We feel the itch, and that comes through loud. We feel the relief when it stops, and that comes through even louder. Both of these are well built and well wired, and they report to us honestly. What we have no instrument for is the road we did not take. Nothing in us reports on an absence. No creature ever needed a sense for the path it did not walk, or the conversation it did not have, or the connection it did not make, because the question closed before the connection had time to form. There was never any survival value in grieving a tangent you never took. So we are not numb. We are specifically, precisely blind in one direction, and it happens to be the direction where all of this is happening. Which means the urge you feel is not a character flaw, and it's not a bad habit you picked up from your phone. It is good old equipment doing exactly what it was built to do, in a world it was never calibrated for. The wanting is fine. The wanting is ancient. What changed is that the wanting now gets satisfied every single time, immediately, and the machinery on the other side of it never gets to run. That is the long game, trusting a process you were built to run and were never built to observe. Now, an obvious objection, and I want to take it seriously because it is the one that keeps this from turning into nonsense. You cannot leave every gap open. If I do not know whether the mushroom in my yard is safe to eat, I'm not going to sit with that question for a week to build character. I'm going to look it up immediately, and I will lose exactly nothing by closing that gap in 4 seconds. So which ones are worth the resistance? Curiosity researchers have a distinction here that is decades old and that I think is one of the most useful things I've run into. They split curiosity into 2 kinds. The first kind they call deprivation curiosity. That is the itch. It's the need to know, the missing piece, the gap that bothers you. And it is genuinely uncomfortable in a low-grade way. And the only thing that relieves it is the answer. You get the answer, the itch stops, and you're done. That's the mushroom. That is the name on the tip of your tongue. That is most of what we type into a search bar. The second kind they call interest curiosity. Different temperature entirely. That one is not an itch, it's a pull. It is open. It is exploratory. It does not need to be resolved to feel good, and it does not necessarily stop when you learn something, because learning something usually just opens it wider. Those of you who have been with me for a while recognize this because we've been sorting questions by temperature for a while now, hot questions and warm ones. This is the same split arrived at from a different direction. They got here with brain scanners and questionnaires. We got here by paying attention to what happens in a room when somebody asks the wrong kind of question at the right moment. And here is why the distinction earns its keep. Our tools are deprivation machines. They are magnificent at it. They close the information gap faster and more reliably than anything in human history. And if the itch is all you had, then honestly, close it and get on with your day. Nothing is lost. But watch what a lifetime of that does. Every time we shut a gap in 3 seconds, we are training, we are rehearsing, we are etching these practices into our brains. We are teaching ourselves 100 times a day that an open question is a problem to be solved as fast as possible. And that training does not stay in its lane. It does not politely confine itself to trivia. It comes with us into the questions that were never itches at all. What do I actually want? Is this the work I should be doing? What do I owe the people around me? Who have I become in the last 5 years without deciding to? Those are not deprivation questions. There is no answer waiting on the other side of them that makes the feeling stop. They are the other kind, the kind that is supposed to stay open, the kind that gets deeper the longer you carry it, and the shallower the moment you demand it resolve. And we are bringing to those questions a reflex built entirely out of trivia. We are reaching for the closure that worked on the mushroom. That is the real cost. Not that we look things up, that we have trained the reach so thoroughly that it fires on questions that were never meant to be answered on the spot. So the discernment is the skill, not leaving every gap open, but rather learning to feel in the moment a question arrives, which kind are you holding? The itch, close it, no loss. The pull, that is a load-bearing question, and the resistance is doing something. That noticing is itself trainable. It might be the most trainable part of all of this. There is one more gap, and it sits under everything I've said so far, and it is the one I think about the most. Notice something about every example in her essay. The search bar, the article you did not read, two physicists at an antenna in 1964 hearing a hiss they could have written off as equipment noise, staying with the question long enough to discover the radiation left over from the beginning of the universe. Every one of those is a person alone with information. That's not a flaw in her work. She is a neuroscientist, and the unit she studies is a brain, and the gap she is describing is the distance between a question and its answer. And the reason she says it is worth protecting is that it makes us learn more. And there is another gap that runs underneath that one. It is the distance between a question and another human being. I spent 2 years asking strangers real questions on the streets of Washington, D.C., and I can tell you that the space after you ask, before they answer, is not primarily about information. Something else is happening in there. They are deciding whether to trust you. They are deciding how much to say. They are becoming a person to you instead of a source, and you are becoming a person to them instead of a stranger with a question. That gap has no efficient version. You cannot compress it. You cannot speed it up by asking better, and you certainly cannot skip to the part where they trust you. And when we hand our questions to a machine, that gap does not get shortened. It gets removed because there was never anyone standing in it. When I ask Claude something, nobody on the other side is deciding whether to be honest with me. Nobody is weighing what I can handle. Nobody is doing me a kindness by telling me something true. And I'm not doing the harder thing either, which is asking a question out loud to a face without knowing what comes back. I'm not going to tell you to go walk 2,000 miles and talk to 1,300 strangers. I did that. It was a strange season of my life, an important one, and it's not a program, and it's not the point. The point is much smaller and more available. There is a question you could ask a person this week that you will probably ask a screen instead, because the screen is faster, and it will not look at you funny, and it will not ask you anything back. The last part is the whole thing. It will not ask you anything back. This weekend, a woman asked for directions to a local road. I had to remember how to give directions. It's been so long. I had to think about the easiest directions with the fewest turns to get her to her destination. A shorter route may have saved 30 seconds. I narrowed it down to left at your first stop sign, straight through a traffic circle, and then left at the first traffic light. It felt good to be a human Google Maps for an open question. I think both of our lives are richer for the question. I want to tell you about a stretch of my life that I do not talk about much, because it is the only real credential I have for what I am about to ask of you. 10 years ago, I started a project called Inquiry of the Day 365. The commitment was simple and a bit scary in the way that good ones usually are. A question and a matching reflection each day, every day, for a year. Here's what nobody tells you about that kind of commitment. There is no day when it works perfectly. There is no morning where you write the question and feel the machinery turn over. Most mornings you write it and it lands flat, or at least feels that way, and you go to work and nothing detectable happens. And the only evidence you have that any of it matters is that you did it again the next day. That is what faith in an invisible mechanism actually feels like from the inside. It feels like nothing. It feels like a slightly foolish habit you have not gotten around to quitting. About 8 months in, the whole thing nearly ran me into a guardrail. I had the job, I had the commute, which anyone in the Washington, D.C. region will tell you is its own full-time position. I had a family who deserved more of me than they were getting, and I had this daily project, and something had to give, and the thing that gave was sleep, because sleep is always the thing that gives. One afternoon, I was driving home. Traffic was slow. Sun was coming through the driver's side window the way it does in the late afternoon, warm and steady and heavy on my face. And I went under. Not for long, long enough. Long enough that I have thought about that stretch of road for 10 years. I pulled off. I sat there, and the question I had to ask myself was not the one I expected. I thought the question was whether to quit the project. It was not. The question was whether I had confused the practice with the punishment. Because here's the thing I had gotten wrong, and it's the exact thing I'm worried that you'll get wrong if you take the first half of this episode and run with it. I had heard resistance grows the muscle, and I had concluded that more resistance grows more muscle. Load it heavier, sleep less, push through. That is the version of this idea that ends up on a poster in a gym, and it is wrong on its own terms, and the metaphor tells you exactly how it's wrong if you follow it honestly. Muscle does not grow during the lift. It grows afterwards, in the rest, in the recovery. The lift is the signal, and the growth is the response, and the response requires that you stop and let it happen. Load without rest is not growth, it is injury. Everyone who has ever trained seriously knows this, and everyone who has ever been ambitious has ignored it. I've been signaling constantly and recovering never. So I did not quit. I changed how I held it. Fewer moving parts, real sleep, protected the way I would protect any other appointment. A question a day still, but no longer as a debt I owed somebody. And the practice survived for a while, which it would not have if I had kept going the way I was going. That is the 10 years, not an unbroken streak, and it's not a triumph. A long, ordinary, mostly invisible run of showing up with a question, plus one afternoon on the interstate that taught me the limit of my own idea. I'm telling you this because the thing I am asking you to do only works if you also know when to stop. Trusting the invisible mechanism is not the same as grinding yourself down and calling it devotion. The gap does its work while you rest. That's not a loophole in the argument. That is the argument. So what do we actually do? 3 things. And the first one is the one I want you to take. You still get your answer, and that is the whole design of it. You're not giving anything up. Before you type the question, take 60 seconds and put down your own guesses first. Out loud, on paper, in your head, it doesn't matter. What do I already think? What would I say if nobody could look it up? What is my best guess and why? Then search. You have not refused the tool. You have refused the instant. You cracked the window before the machine could shut it, and you gave the mechanism 60 seconds to run. 60 seconds is nothing. That is why it works. This is not a discipline, it's a wedge, and it fits in the smallest gap in your day. Try it for a few days, 10 days, not forever, and then look back and see what you noticed. Next up, the held question. One question, not all of them, just one. Pick a question you could answer this week and decline to. Do not chase it, do not resolve it, just live near it and notice what drifts in while it stays open. The adjacent thought, the thing you overheard that suddenly connects, the conversation that lands differently because you're carrying something. That is the window held open on purpose, by hand. Start with a week. If a week feels like it's too much, start with a day, because a day of actually holding a question is worth more than a month of intending to. Last, the overnight. End a work session with something you could finish and do not finish it. Carry it into sleep. Let the part of you that keeps working while you are not watching do its job. This is the smallest and the most direct expression of everything we have talked about, because it asks you to trust a process you will not observe, will not feel, and cannot verify, and go to bed anyway. Which, when I put it that way, is most of what faith has ever been. I want to come back to where we started. 6 seconds of silence, and both of us reaching for the skip button. Here is what I think we were actually reaching for. Not the answer. Neither of us knew what the answer was. We were reaching for the end of the not knowing, which is a different thing entirely, and we have gotten very good at it. And it costs us something we have almost no ability to detect. So this week, when the small hole opens and your hand starts to move, I'm not asking you to stop it. I'm asking you to notice it. That is all. Notice the reach, one time, and let the noticing take 60 seconds. And then, because the noticing is only worth what you do with it, here is the question I'm leaving you with. It's the one this show has been circling over for the last year, and I do not have an answer for you, and I would not give you one if I did. What question are you avoiding that would change everything? Do not answer it today.